Thanks, Rob. Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started. We had a little bit of chit-chat there for a while, so we'll go ahead and get started. Okay, so I'll give you a little bit about my background. So my whole career, I've pretty much spent just getting ideas off napkins and putting them in customers' hands. That's pretty much all I've done since I got out of the Army. Graduated from the NCO Academy while I was in the Army, got a job with a defense contractor. I've developed over 20 combat vehicles, stealth technology, a lot of the night vision technology that's out there today. I came out of that. I'm primarily a systems engineer, project manager, operations, and business development guy. So that's kind of where my background comes, and I've done a lot of that, so it works really well in the startup environment. I helped launch, my initial jump into the startups was back in '99. I helped launch 2 .com startups. That imploded. I went back to a Fortune 1000 company and helped them get into a new market space. We did pretty successful. We went through and created some product lines for them and turned that into almost $20 million a year business in 2.5 years. So they thought that was great, wanted to promote me, vice president, corner office, all that good stuff. Kind of our conversation we had earlier, I had to think, let's see, San Jose, California, Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Man, I didn't see that happening. So in 2004, I left that company, started GLJ Group. And as GLJ Group, my first part of my career was mainly around business capture, new business development. So I've captured a little bit over about $350 million for my clients during that time, and I've lost one proposal. So 10 years, one proposal, those are good numbers. Then about 4 years ago, I launched South Valley Angels, which is your classic angel investment group. We listen to deals, we meet once a month, listen to all you entrepreneurs who are going to change the world, and some of those we fund. So that's my background. So I've always worked in the environment of figuring out how to get ideas off the ground and moving out. So that's what I've done. So we're going to go through sort of a ground up piece on how to do that and get it going. So when I'm not doing work in part-time, I play guitar in a rock band. So that's that's the kind of real side. So we've all got our hobbies and so forth. So I don't just do this all the time. Okay, so we're going to cover kind of 3 areas. First, we're going to sort of set the stage and set the foundation so everybody has sort of a common ground to start from. So we're going to talk about getting your idea organized and so forth and so on. And then once we get done with that, we're going to talk about going out and getting your idea off the ground, how to get out there, how to get funded, what's the different types of funding monies you can get, how do you do that, so forth and so on. And then when it's all done, I'll come back and we're going to talk specifically about how to get your message out, how to do a pitch, how the pitch process works, how to get your pitch deck done right, how to have the right message and make you stand above the crowd. Because the bar has definitely been raised and the competition out there is fierce to go out and get funding. But on a positive note, there's more money available than there's ever been. So sort of a good news, bad news. And when we're done with the first parts, we'll have to take a break, and then the attorneys will get up and they'll talk a little about the legal side. So that's kind of how the day is going to lay out. Okay, so let's start about getting your idea organized. So one of the things that I'm going to talk about a lot are plans. Obviously, being a systems engineer and a project manager, I believe in planning. And I believe in planning a lot. I think it's absolutely critical. If nothing else, for you to use your own plan, or for you to be able to communicate what's inside of your head to somebody else on your team. It may not be necessary for anything else other than that, but it's critical for your success, I believe. So let's start talking about what starts. So everybody in here is probably wanting to talk about getting money from investors and starting their business. So let's step back, and there's fundamentally 3 business models that I identify. At the beginning, 2 of them kind of feel the same, and that's the traditional and the startup. So let's start off here. So we're going to start with a traditional business model. That's your basic model that everybody's been doing for 2,000 years. You start your idea in the garage, you go out, you get a little loan, make a little money, get a little more money, sell some stuff, boom, boom, and slowly work this over time. The next primary model is franchising. And in franchising, what you're doing is you're just buying an infrastructure. You're buying something that somebody's put in place. You wear the hat, follow the checklist, you'll probably be successful. The third model that we're going to spend pretty much all of our time talking about today is what I call the startup model. So fundamental differences of these models. The traditional model, you have complete control of it. It's your business. The downside is you have complete control of it. It's generally debt funded. You build it over time. In the franchise, you have an infrastructure. It gets debt funded as well, and you follow the rules and so forth. In the startup model, we're talking equity and investor funded. So those are primarily what separate the 3 models. In this valley, everybody seems to think that it's all about the startup model. That's the only way to get funded. But the reality, there's a lot of other ways of doing it, and business has been doing it for a long time. So let's talk about the startup model. So it's important when we get started to understand the pure fundamentals of what we're doing and why how this model works and what makes it successful. So as we talked about long-term debt in a traditional business and over time and managing your money and growing over a controlled and long-term debt and lines of credit and all these various types of methods to run your business. The startup business model is based on fast, explosive growth, and it's done through private investment, not through debt. And that's critically important because it's an investor-based economic model. If the investors aren't there, the model doesn't work. So it's all about investors getting money, returning that money back, and launching more and more startups. It's generally short-term in the 3 to 8 year period, of which something significant happens. Usually what that is the investor exit. Now that might be an acquisition happens, or you go IPO, or whatever the case is, but a significant event happens within 3 to 8 years, and the investors are out, and then the business goes and does what it's going to do from there. Some of the challenges of this particular model are pretty straightforward. One, unlike the traditional business model, in this model you're going to lose control. On day one, you own 100% of your company. As you go down the road several years later and you've taken some money and so forth, you're going to lose that. That's going to get diluted, as we say in dilution. Dilution is part of the game plan. That's part of the model. It comes with the territory. It's how the business is run. You use equity. You spend equity rather than spending money and getting loans. You give people equity, they give you money, or they give you time. So that's how this model works. Now every time you do that and provide more equity, you lose more and more and more control. So quite frequently, it's not uncommon for the CEO to get replaced. When a VC round comes in, they got a better CEO who may be right and they may replace you. So you're going to lose control in this business, but it's part of the model, and as long as you understand that, it goes. The other challenge you're going to have is building a team. Unlike the traditional model where you build your team as you have enough money to hire them and pay them, in this model you're going to try to build a team without paying them anything. So you're going to try to get people on board early with no money, which is a challenge. Now there's ways to do that, and as long as everybody understands what's going on, then everybody understands that we're not playing the entire game here. In the traditional business model, you're playing the long game. You're trying to build it. 10 years later, you're successful. Maybe you can operate on your own with very little lines of credit and so forth. Here, we're playing the 2-minute drill. You're going from now to the 2-minute drill, and the idea is to get acquired or go IPO and have something big happen. And that's what's uniquely different in this model. The advantages of this model is that you're fully funded on day one. So as soon as you go out and find an investor and get funded, and the investor says, how much money do you need to do this? And you're going to go, oh, I need $500,000. Okay, here's $500,000. Go do it. So there's no little money here and slowly work your way up to it. They're going to give you the amount of money necessary to do what you need to do. Now the expectation is you're going to do that. You're going to execute. Then maybe you'll get some more money and now you'll grow. But that's uniquely different here. So you have a fully funded budget when you start. Now start doesn't mean the bootstrapping phase, and we'll talk about that a little later too. And it's this amount, it's getting all this money up front to do your work that allows that explosive growth. So the key to making that work is understanding how much you need and asking for the right amount of money. Okay, so now we kind of have the foundation. So we've got an investor-based model here. So let's look at step one. One, understand the model. And then we're going to talk about a fundamental philosophy that I believe in, which I always like to joke around at the water cooler with the rest of our investor buddies, because we always have these things. So one of the things we're going to talk about is the purpose of this model is explosive growth and 10 times investor return. Now, I would say that the whole purpose of this model is to get the investor his 10 times return. There's no other reason. And here's where my logic falls in. So I'm sure everybody out there has heard that the purpose is to build a sustainable company with these kind of things. I argue that what you're looking to do is figure out how to get that investor his 10 times return on investment. Because if you can write him a check and give him his 10 money back, then you probably did everything else right. Or you wouldn't have that 10 times return of money to give him back. Fair enough? And so everybody understands the philosophy that came out of the 80s. You know, the customer's number one. It's all about, keeping your customer happy. Who's your very first customer as a startup? Probably the investor that wrote you that first big check. So keep him happy. Because if you can keep him happy, then you're probably keeping everybody else happy down the food chain, and it all works out at the end. As soon as you can't give him his 10 times return on investment, then you've probably made some errors there and nobody's getting anything back and so forth. So that's the way I look at that. The goal is to be able to give him his money back. Okay? And then there's my sort of mantra there, have a plan. Understand the model, have a plan. And the plan we're going to talk a lot about. In fact, we're going to start that right now. So as we get organized, so I do a lot of work with startups and one-on-one acceleration and so forth. And one of the biggest things that most startups I find with young entrepreneurs and with startups is they really haven't thought through their business and really got it organized to the level as a business. In some cases, it's barely more organized than a real well thought out hobby. So let's talk about some of the things that go on here. I refer to this as the strategy architecture. And the idea when you're starting is to understand what your strategies are. So there's a variety of things we're doing. So we're going to go left to right. So the first thing we're going to talk about is a funding strategy. Somebody has to pay for this. I was also noticing some of the pictures being taken. If you grab my business card off the back, or I'll get my email, send me an email and I'll send you everything we're going to see today. So you'll get everything in the mail. So save you guys all those digital pictures in the camera there. Okay, so let's start off with the end game. The very most important thing to understand, one, are you a business or are you a product? So are you a company or a product? There's no right answer, but it's amazing how confusing people can be about what it is. Now, here's the differences. If you're a company, you're going to build an infrastructure, you're going to bring on team, you're going to have staff, you're going to do all sorts of stuff, and you're going to grow exponentially. If you're a product, you may never be more than you and your partner, and you're going to build a prototype or you're going to build an MVP, then you're going to go to somebody and license it to them and sell it. You may never build a company. So there's definitely differences and different strategies of what you're trying to accomplish to get out there. Okay? So now, under the funding strategy, you're going to be self-funded. Are you going to be debt, equity? How are you going to fund yourself? In most cases, you're all going to start as self-funded. You're probably not going to do debt because if you need it, you can't get it. So you're probably going to go down in equity. So you have to have an understanding how you're going to get your money. Where's your money going to come from? Understand your protection strategies. How do you protect you and your company? Do you do patents? Do you do trademarks? Do you go out and get an attorney right off the bat on day one? I highly recommend having an attorney in the back pocket if you're doing a startup. They're really, really handy. So you got to understand the various aspects of how you're going to protect yourself and how's that going to work. The other strategy you need to look at is what I call your solution strategy. How are you going to sell your solution? What is your solution? Are you just a product and you're going to just go out and do licensing? Are you going to be a SaaS model and you're going to have 3 or 4 different levels of this, that, and the other you're going to do? Are you going to have a product line of a bunch of stuff? So understand how your product and how your solution is going to lay out and what that solution is going to look like. Now, solution strategy and marketing and sales strategy. Odds are, for every strategy you pick, you're going to have a sales and marketing strategy that goes along with that, because they probably all have very independent and different methods of how you might roll that out across the board and what you're doing. And then the last thing I refer to is the operation strategy. How are you going to operate? How are you going to staff? In-house? Are you going to do this outsourcing and so forth? So these are a lot of the early thoughts you need to have when you're just getting your business off the ground to understand what you're going to look like when you grow up. Now we're going to start talking about that classic business plan. And you'll notice up here, I just call it a plan. I really don't like the idea of a business plan. To me, you have one plan, and that plan is to make your business successful. Within that plan, there's a little bit of design discussion. There's a little this, little that. It's not just a business plan. So I refer to it as a plan, the plan. So what we're going to talk a little bit about this. And I like to write the plans up so that they're readable. I find that a lot of the formats that you find on the internet just make you jump around. You know, it's nice to do things in a manner so I can read it. The other thing we're going to talk about plans is do not go out and download a template. Most of the people in this room probably have no need for more than a 5 or 6 page plan today at all. That probably explains everything you're doing in enough detail to get it across. That's probably all you know at this point in that level of detail. In fact, most of you will probably never have a plan bigger than 20 pages. We're not looking to be Boeing and have a 85 or 90 or 200 page plan. So the plan is going to be simple. And I break it down into some really common sections. One section is the product and service overview. And this is basically what do you do and how do you do it. And so here you're going to describe your product, just tell me stuff about your product. What is it? How does it do? Where's it at? What's going on? So I understand what it is you do. Then you're going to go down and break that down a little bit here into company organization and various functions that you perform. And there's really 2 kinds of organizations. You have an internal organization and an external. Partners that are critical to who you work. So it's important to understand more and more in today's world there's a lot of partnering that goes on. A lot of people work outside of the internal organization. So understand all these things and give some thoughts to how you might see that unfolding down the road. And then again, you've got the details of the operation. How are you going to operate? So that's section 1. What do you do and how you do it? Section 2 is the market. What market are you in? What's really important here is, you'll hear me talk about this, but I refer to the market as being your sandbox. What sandbox do you play in? And who's in your sandbox with you? And what's going on in that sandbox at any given time? And do you understand what it is? And at the end of recess, how are you going to own that sandbox? Okay? So in the market, we want to know those things. Market dynamics are critical to understand. I would say that most startups that I work with and most actually have a fairly good handle of the market they're in, because they're always out there searching, and mainly they're searching to see who their competitors are. So they really, in most cases, I find that most startups have a good understanding of the market. But the market dynamics are critical, because the changing in market dynamics can derail your idea faster than almost anything. So I just helped launch a company that puts hybrid kits on trucks and makes some hybrid trucks. So when I worked with them a couple years ago, the primary messaging was all about gas, because they double the gas mileage of anything they put the kit on. So we were talking about that gas was near $4 a gallon. Gas was a really strong story. You talk to a fleet manager with 20 trucks, and I say, hey, I can double the fuel economy of all your trucks. And it's like, that's really exciting. Well, then when gas starts dropping it down now to like $3.10 a gallon, the fuel story is not quite as strong anymore. So I went back with them and worked in this spring, and we changed their messaging to be about utility. They carry more utility now because they have generator in the back and all these things. So the market dynamics went from high gas to low gas prices, which made the desirable features of their truck in many cases not match their message. So they were all upside down now in a market that had changed its positioning. The other thing you want to talk about is really understanding your addressable market. A lot of people understand kind of fundamentally what market they're in, but a lot of companies will lose a lot of credibility when they're defining their market if you don't understand their market. So an example of that is I worked with a startup who made a smart gear shift knob for your car. It could see how many times you shift, and it had all these features that it could tell you what's going on and in theory make you a better driver. So he comes back and tells me that he's in the $3 trillion automotive market. Well, kind of, sort of. He's really more like in the $1.2 million gear shift knob market. So he loses credibility when he tries to convince, I'm in this giant $1 trillion market. So it's important to understand your market, your target market, your serviceable market, and how you're going to get there. And the other thing that's important are the market segments. So a lot of people come out and try to say how they're going to conquer the world in one bite. And in most cases, if you've got a lot of different market segments associated with your business, you're probably going to start in one of those. And then you're going to work your way around to the other markets. And there's a reason why you start in the one you're starting in, either because it's the biggest market segment or your team is very well aligned to that market. And that's why you're getting into that space. And then after that is the competitive landscape. Now, competitive landscape is an interesting one, and we'll talk about it when we get to doing pitches. Most people look at a competitive landscape and they compare their product. In fact, when I see most pitches, most of the time I see the classic table that says, here's a list of our competitors, and here's all the important features, and notice we have yeses in all of ours, and they don't have any yeses in theirs, or we've got all the check boxes. And that tends to be a feature by feature. Yeah, got a question?
Yes, you were saying that to start out with the biggest segment, or the segment that the team is aligned with, the lean approach that's highly recommended these days, right? Say to start with the smallest possible. How do you reconcile the two?
Well, there's some of that. So there's all sorts of arguments about which market space to start with. Size doesn't really matter. I would say in most cases, I understand the lean, but I probably am not going to go after the smallest market regardless of what it is, just from a business perspective. However, what you're not likely to, 99% of the time, the market space you go after first is probably the one your team aligns with. Because if your team doesn't know how to work in that space, then you shouldn't be getting in that space right now. Make sense? So yeah, you're right. But I wouldn't necessarily go to the small one, so I disagree with that one. Of course, I'm an optimist. I go for the biggest guy in the room, not the smallest one. Yeah.
So one of the challenges I see about getting market data is the expense. Like there's IDC, Gartner. I'm in the technology side, so awfully expensive. I've like looked at their site. There's probably 20 sites that could be invaluable, or 20 reports that could be invaluable. Added up, it's like $100,000.
Absolutely.
And it's crazy expensive. Do you, or we could talk about this later if there's a proper time in the presentation, but how does someone who's in a startup mode get access to this just for the purpose of kind of getting the story really locked down, not necessarily taking advantage of IDC or Gartner or any of these guys in a way that, hurts their business, but, helps me get started, and if so, then starts a relationship.
Okay, that's easy enough. You're right. So you look at Gartners, you look at Hoovers, they spend a lot of money on analysts. You can go on and ask them any question, and they'll pull together a report for you for $20,000 and send you that report. However, at the end of the day, we're not doing taxes. We're not talking to the IRS. Google works fine. Most of the investors are going to use Google to find a number. So if you go out and Google a number. Now, getting market data is difficult. And what I recommend to do that is to just sit down and start asking questions about your customer. How many of them are there? How big are they? How much money do they spend? What do they do? Yada, yada. Just start asking questions and Google it. See what comes back. Oh, that was kind of interesting. Save that page, capture that number, whatever it is. Over time, you're going to build up a bunch of numbers. Then you go back and you pick out the ones that prove your point. The reality is, even an expert number, there's no guarantee that those numbers are right. They're considered to be better than others because they've had professional analysts do it and spent some time. And yes, they probably are better than the average. But in reality, at this point, what you're doing is you're selling a vision. You're selling your vision. You don't have enough behind you to be selling anything other than a vision. I got a vision and possibly an MVP sitting here in my phone. So you're selling a vision, and you're putting together a story that's credible. Okay? So it's not that any of the numbers are specifically accurate, specific. However, there is risk at the detail of having bad numbers that lead you down a strategic path and decision making that's now was incorrect because of numbers. But I would say you can find all you need on Google to be able to build your story. All right, so now we get back to that pesky plan thing again. Now in your plan, what are you doing, how are you doing it, when are you doing, how much is it going to cost? And we're going to go through details on this. But what we want to talk about is where you are today, where you're going, how does it all fit? And I like to work a lot from milestones, and we'll talk about the milestones out there as we go. So there's fundamentally 3 milestones to be concerned of, and we'll talk a lot about them later on. We're just talking about how to talk to the investors. So the first milestone is your product development. You have to build whatever it is you're selling, whether it's a software, or a piece of hardware, whatever. And you can't come out of that first milestone until you have an MVP or a prototype. The second milestone then is what's referred to as go-to-market. And that's really where you're going to take your MVP now and put it in people's hands, and they're going to start using it, and they're going to come back to tell you that they didn't like the color green you chose for your landing page, or whatever the case may be. Hopefully they'll come back with some good value-added stuff that you can incorporate in it. So that's the second milestone, and that's your go-to-market. And what you're really doing in that milestone is really just validating your product and validating your business model. And we'll get into more detail about that later. The third milestone then is the growth milestone, where now you've got the right product. Because when you got your MVP, when you have your MVP and you're going to go to the go-to-market phase, all you really have at that point is the product that you think the customer wants. So in the go-to-market phase, you're going to put it in customers' hands and let them help you tweak it and make it what they really want. Then once you have that and you have your model validated and you're selling it at a price they're willing to pay and you're not leaving any money on the table, you've got it as high as it can be and everything's working, then now you have a product that your customer thinks you want and it's validated. Now you can go to the milestone 3, which is the growth, and now you're going to do $60 million and be all happy and everything's going to work for you. So we'll talk about that. So it's really a key on milestones. Milestones are important in understanding how those fall together. Then, of course, you have your financials, the part that everybody just loves. How do you make money? What are your sales forecasts, profit and losses, and so forth and so on. So this is just a fundamental, basic outline for a business plan. We're going to talk about all aspects of this more in light of how it goes in hand to work with an investor and why you should be able to talk about this intelligently and why that's important. So that's a basic outline. I recommend everybody has a business plan. Now, you could choose to use a slightly different format than this, which we're going to talk about later. Because if you do your pitch deck correctly, your pitch deck should be a summary of your business plan. So the topics in the pitch deck are outlined a little bit differently than this. They're done in a method to convey your message to investors, partners, or people that you want to talk to. So we're going to talk about how to communicate that message there. It could also be an outline for a business plan, so you can use either one, and we'll talk about that one later this afternoon. Okay, now let's talk about getting your idea off the ground. We sort of covered the basics of Business 101, having a plan and understanding what you're out here to do. So now let's talk about getting your idea off the ground. So this is a classic business life cycle. We're all going to start, today, everybody is in here. I guarantee that everybody in the room right now is in that based on what we talked about earlier. So what we're going to do is talk a little bit about how we walk through this. So the first thing to do, everybody starts in the bootstrap phase. You've heard of bootstrapping. That's when you're paying it for yourself, or maybe you're getting some money from some friends and family maybe who's helping you kind of get this thing up and going. But the point is you're doing it yourself. In this phase, this is when you do your business plan. You start building the little bits of your team, try to get your executive team in place. You're understanding what it is you're going to do and how you think you're going to do it. Now, in the first startup that I was in, we went in and barely had what would be considered an MVP in today's standards. It kind of sort of worked, but it was pretty clunky. It wasn't really an MVP. It was probably more like a solid beta. We went in and did one pitch and walked out with a $25 million check for funding. And those days are so gone, unfortunately. So today, because of what's going on in the way the investors are more sophisticated, the entrepreneurs are more sophisticated, the entire space is more sophisticated, and therefore the bar has been raised. So we're going to talk about a lot of things today kind of in a black and white mode, and the reality is the investor world lives in gray. So as soon as we say that you have to have an MVP before you can go talk to get funding, you're going to pick up the paper tomorrow morning and read where somebody had nothing whatsoever and they walked in and got a $10 million funding for some strange reason, yet they don't have anything. It happens. You read about it in the newspaper. So we're going to talk about the fundamentals necessary to get going down the road in more of a black and white, but understand everything we say, you can come up with an example of somebody who is able to do it probably. So the bootstrapping phase, you're going to create your idea, you're going to get a little bit of money. Then you have to go out and get some money. And you're going to get some angel funding, more likely. And to do this, you're going to have a good strategy, a plan, and you have to have your MVP ready. Now, the angel funding traditionally is going to pay you to do this market entry or go to market. So the angel investors are going to be the ones that you're looking for to fund you to validate your product and validate your business model in the go-to-market phase. And during that part of the market entry, now you're going to so you get your seed money now. So now you're out there growing, doing your thing. Got this in people's hands. You got early adopters using it. They're giving you feedback on what works, what doesn't work, what they like, what they don't like. You're incorporating all that in. You're getting your product all ready to go. And now you've got the perfect product. And guess what? Now you're out of money again. So now you're going to probably go and get the VC funding. So hopefully your angels that you talked here are going to hand carry up here and get you VC funding. And that may be in the $5 to $10 to $15 to $20 million range. Who knows? Whatever works for whatever it is you're doing. That market now, to get there and get that money, you've got to have a product up and running. The product has to be validated. There has to be hard evidence that people want it. And that hardest evidence that people want your product is they've written you checks for it. So you've got paying customers, you've got revenue. Nothing trumps revenue. Okay? So the investors are going to look at revenue because the only way to validate a product is anybody willing to write you a check for it? Does anybody want it that bad? So that's where that's at. So now you're going to show up with product, with revenue, and say, yeah, a lot of people want it. We've got the perfect product. They fund you. You're going to go out to the growth. You're going to do your $60, $80, $90 million in sales. Everybody's going to be happy. You're going to pop over. It looks like we're getting a little wind back there. He survived. Okay, now you might go get a B round, a C round, a D round, an E round, however many rounds you need to get wherever you need to go. And then you're going to go out and do some stuff. So the terminology, you got angel funding, VC funding. Sometimes you'll hear institutional funding. Institutional funding and VC funding is kind of interchangeable and so forth. Okay, any questions on this and how you move through the pipes? Oh, got to get a microphone here. There's Robin and his mic. Okay.
Yeah. Can you paste on that cycle where the accelerators and incubators are?
Sure. 99% of the accelerators and incubators are in this phase right here. They're going to give you money to get to here. Everybody expects you to show up. Now, early ones will fund you to come in here and build your product. So the bulk of them are going down here. They're going to play your angels. They're going to come in and probably let you go for a while. And then hopefully while you're in there, you'll get funded by one of them. And then the key is to move you over here so that their investors can help you go to market and validate what you want. That's traditionally how it is. So they kind of fall in this circle a little bit, but normally it's out here. Yeah.
Can you also talk about the timeline as to like typically what you have seen, like how much time the startup spend in the bootstrapping phase and the seed phase and like the Series A and kind of?
Sure. There's no real answer. I've come across, I've worked with startups that have spent 15 years bootstrapping in this phase. You know, it's a steep hill sometimes. In general, this one here is, normally what drives this is how quickly can they give up their day job. So what drives the time is normally in this phase you're still working full time or you're really committed on what you're doing. So you're probably still working full time, building your product, tinkering with it in the garage, doing whatever. So this one here can take a little while to do that. Now, here, once you get into the market entry, in normal, from the models and stuff that I like to work with, I don't think this one here needs to be, in most cases, any longer than 12 months. In 12 months, you should be able to get enough early adopters on board using your system, get enough feedback from them to understand what they like and don't like, and be able to then incorporate that into your product. So you should be able to do that in 12 months. A lot of people, you know, 6 months, that starts getting pretty aggressive. I bet your engineering team can tell you they can do it in 6 months, but I bet they can't. I've worked with a lot of engineering teams. First thing about it, how many engineers we got in here? Since I used to be one. Okay, so none of us know how to project a schedule. I've never seen an engineer that can tell me how to get from, if an engineer gives me an estimate, I guarantee you got to double it. So your engineer will tell you can do it in 6, and guess what? You're back to that 12 months again. So this is probably about 12 months in this frame. The Series A growth, this could be anywhere from 2 to 5. So here's kind of the way it goes. Angels would like to get their money back or get their conversion probably within 18 months, 24 months, 2 years. They'd like to get that to happen. Investors would like to get, and VCs would like to get their money back in 3 to 5 years. The average investor return is more like 8 years right now, in some cases 10. So these two are what you're looking for here in that range. But there's no real answer. It varies all over. Because I'll here to tell you, when you start talking about building your team and going out there, so how many people in here are married or have a significant other? I can guarantee you one of the most exciting conversations is the day you come home and say, well, I think today's the last day. I'm quitting my day job. I'm going to start my startup. That other person comes, I don't think so. Then you have the negotiation. So what does that look like when I get to quit my day job? Anyway, so that really drives a lot of the commitment and how long you have to spend on it and what your commitment is. Questions? Oh, they're all over the place. Okay. Who's driving? Oh, you got the mic. Okay. You win.
Earlier you mentioned that you only should go for funding if you have MVP done and a market entry. So with here the schedule said from you do the market entry afterward. Will you suggest say a soft launch or just some focus groups?
Yeah, so there's a couple things that come into that. So when you go to it's mainly focused about these pieces here, the funding hurdle. The angels now are expecting to see an MVP. They just expect that now. In the early days, they didn't. Now, once you have an MVP, that kind of means it does what it's supposed to do. So you can do a soft launch. So this phase here, I would refer to as what's normally a soft launch, because the last thing you want to do is go out there and get super expensive. Everybody jumps on board. You got 1 million people, and your system crashes because you weren't ready. It couldn't handle that yet. So the soft launch here, you have to do it in a manageable level that the system doesn't die or your prototype doesn't break or whatever the product is you're doing. So it's more of a soft launch there. Now, you may be doing some soft launches down here, but more cases out here, you're just doing your beta stuff. You've got your buddies, 20, 30 people, maybe 100 people, whatever, working on your system. If you're a software person, I'm assuming most folks in here are software, so I'm talking in software tense. Does that make sense?
Yeah, only the marketing part. If you do a soft launch, you still need to get the word out to do that.
And absolutely.
How do you measure that? If you do a full launch or a soft launch, you don't want to get 2 months later again writing your reporters and etc. Say from, hey, yeah, now we do a real launch.
Absolutely. There's a marketing campaign that's always going on. So it's a marketing campaign. So one of the companies I'm working with, so for example, we just put a website out in January and put a really very, very basic feature set of what their entire platform does, just enough to start building an internet presence. Get their name out there. And now they've got like 3,000 users without really any advertising, but they're getting an internet presence. They do a blog every once in a while. So your marketing starts as soon as you think you're real. Marketing in theory should start. All right, who's next? You're next.
Sorry. Is it okay to use the seed funding to get non-paying customers?
Oh, absolutely. Keep in mind that normally what you're looking for in your seed funding is to validate your product and validate your model. It doesn't really have anything to do with revenue.
So we plan to have the first 3 months free for our customers.
There always has to be an early adopter program of some sort to get people on board. I mean, you have to have something to entice them. Getting started is the hardest. Once it starts getting traction, it can grow on its own. But yeah, there's always an early adopter program. And we'll talk about the milestones. But everybody gets wrapped up around revenue, and it's not that critical. Well, like I said, as soon as you can get it, you can get it. Do so. Right here in the blue.
So my question is, you mentioned that you take MVP and go out of market to get initial users at the seed funding stage. What if MVP requires it's kind of more scientific and requires some research investment and so on? What's your kind of start?
Okay, she's asking about what if you're more of a scientific or technical side and you're not just a simple consumer product and there's more work involved. And this is pretty common in medical, healthcare, these kind of arenas that there's more work required. And those markets understand that a little bit, so they tend to operate a little bit on a sliding scale. So they're not going to, when you come talk to a medical group, they're probably not expecting you to show up with a medical device at this phase. But what happens a lot of times also is that those kind of ideas tend to generate frequently out of universities. They roll those out, and then the university kind of helps get it to a point, and then they try to get an MVP, and then they go out and get funding. So there's a university step in there that often doesn't happen in other ones. Does that make sense? Yeah, if you're in a technical side, then there's people that understand how that works, and the investors move in that slightly different space. Yeah. Okay?
Yes, could you give a little bit more definition about what you mean by your minimum viable product?
Sure.
For instance, a few days ago at a meetup, we were talking with an individual who basically said if you don't have an MVP by 9 hours, then you're late.
Okay.
So there's a different understanding.
Well, I would say that if you can do your MVP in 9 hours, you better be a first to market because you have nothing defensible. Because if I can do it in 9 hours, then we can be there tomorrow and be competing. But yeah, so fundamentally, when somebody says a minimally viable product, so let's use something simple. You're creating a photo sharing app. Then what I should be able to do with your MVP is upload a photo and share it with somebody. Now, there may be a bunch of features that are going to come of things I can do with that photo later and do other things and do all sorts of stuff. But right now, if it's a photo sharing app, I better be able to upload a photo and share it. If I can't do that, then it's not an MVP. So that's fundamentally, it has to be able to do the core thing that it's supposed to do, should be. Now, again, the word MVP could be considered a subjective term. Well, my idea is an MVP. And I'll give you a story of how that works. So I used to do a lot of contracts and a lot of proposals for the Department of Defense. So the government had this problem all the time. They'd put out an RFP for some new thing. So they get the proposals back. And you got A, B, and C are the 3 people that competed. And you take a look at the proposal and they say, oh, it's off the shelf, it's ready to go, it's got all this going on for it, it's no risk, yada, yada, yada. So they look at it, look at the price, say, okay, everybody else is building a prototype version, you're already ready to go, let's go. So they get it out there, get into the program, award them the money, and realize that it's not really off the shelf. It's kind of sitting on a shelf, but that's because it's not working, because they haven't really done it. So they started saying, okay, so how do we, so they came up with what's called a technology readiness level, or a TRL. Has anybody heard of that term? If you deal anything in the government, they do that. And that's how they do it. It's a 1 through 9 scale. So the magic number on that scale is a TRL level 6. TRL level 6 says that your product has now been given to somebody, an early adopter, who's using it in a real environment the way it's intended to be used. Now, that doesn't mean it's working perfectly and flawlessly, but it's being used in an environment. It's no longer on a bench. It's no longer a beta. It's now an MVP that somebody's using the way they're supposed to. That means it's a TRL level 6. So that's the magic number. Once you get that, you're kind of golden in the development world, because now all the risk is out. The proof of principle's done. I know that it will do what it's supposed to. I can see it doing it. So that's kind of how that works. So that's a problem that a lot of people have, is What's a TRL? Now you'll find that on your team, I find this funny. So if I go to a team with 6 different people, put them all in a separate room, and go in and ask 4 fundamental questions, out of those 6 people, I will get 24 different answers. Because it's interesting. So if I go talk to the CEO or the sales guy, this product's ready. We're putting it down. We're signing people today. Just make the checkout available. When do you want it? I can deliver it. That's got those features. It'll do all that. Okay, I go talk to the engineer. Oh, it's a disaster. We can't even get it off the bench. It's got so many holes in it. You know, the bug report is pages long. The reality is it's somewhere in between those 2 things. So even within your team, you'll be surprised as a CEO how hard it is to keep your team on the same page and on the same level and understanding subjectively where you are as an organization. Your sales reps are always going to have you ready to go. You just need to write a check. And your engineers are always going to have you as a disaster. You're never going to get out the door. And so you want that balance, though, because neither one of those are really quite right. Let's see. Anything else? Okay. So that's the fundamental business model. Now, the big rule of business or anything, all the things on this end that you can pull closer to this end is better. So if you can have revenue here and MVPs and people doing stuff here rather than having to wait out to here, that's all good. So everything you can move this way because it's all about reducing risk. And more of those things that you've already done, the less risk there is. The less things you have done, then the more risk there is. Okay, so now you understand the game, you've got your plan, and now you're thinking about, I'm going to get some money. So there's 3 types of places to get money generally. There's the good old Bank of America. We talked about that. If you need it, you probably can't get it. And I find it interesting, when we're doing due diligence on companies and looking and so forth, I always get, do you guys do a credit check? Do you guys do a credit check of the companies and the CEOs when you're doing it? We may do a background check, but we never do a credit check, because odds are by the time you get this, your credit's toast. All your cards are full. You've run your entire business on it as much as you can, and you're coming out for funding because I really need money. I'm running out of folks. Nobody's buying me. I'm not getting anything. So we know that you're here looking for money, and your credit probably isn't all that great. And most entrepreneurs, they're just like addicts, like anything else. They're going to build their business and so forth and so on, and they know how to play this card game. So anyway, so you got debt funding. Probably the cheapest money you'll ever get. It's a nice little interest rate. You do it, you pay your thing, you move on down the road. Second type of money is the type of money that everybody always comes to me. And I've done works on grants, I've done SBIRs and all these kind of things. Grants, great money. It's free money. You never pay it back. They give it to you. You write a white paper, they give you $100,000, The problem with grant money is it's cyclical. It happens like 2-3 times a year, depending on which organization you're dealing with. It can take them a year to decide whether they want to pick your grant. So from the time you put in a grant to actually get money, it could be a year, 12 months, 18 months. It works good for technologies like you were talking about, where you can't get any money to give you money because you're just too early. So grants are great. They're free. They're really painful. If you've never done them, they can be painful. But they're easy way to do. If you've done a lot of them and you're a tech writer and you know how to do those things, you can just put them out there. And there's a rule that. Okay, now we're going to get to the private investment. That's what everybody's here to talk about. Good old private investment money. You're just going to find some rich guy at Starbucks next to you having coffee, and he says, I got $1 million. That's a great idea. Here, we don't make the check out to you. Okay, so you're going to go to Band of Angels, these kind of folks locally. Those are the 3 types of way of getting money. So let's talk a little about debt and grants real quick to get them out of the way, because we're not going to spend much time on them. Okay, Silicon Valley Bank happens to be a bank that does work a little bit more in the entrepreneur environment. They're much easier to work with. They have specific organizations within them specified with that. Now, at the end of the day, they're still a bank. They're not an investor, they're a bank. You still have to meet the requirements of a bank. But they're an interesting bank, because if you know somebody who knows somebody who can walk in, it's amazing how suddenly their rules change. But they're still a bank, but they're a little easier a bank. But they still fall in the category of debt. There's some local independents out there. Like San Jose, there's a group called Opportunity Fund. And they'll give you like up to $100,000, I think it's like 5-6 years. And they don't really look at everything. All they look is, do you have the ability to pay off the loan? They don't do a background check on you, credit check on you. If you can make the payments, then you can get the loan. They're a little pickier. It tends to be about 8%, depending what percentage-wise. But it's a debt loan. The Small Business Association. You can go and get SBA loans, but they're just like a bank. They're no different than any other bank. Oh, go ahead. You got a question back there.
Yeah, just real quick on the banks. What's the financial amount? It's not typically on the higher end.
Trip is not higher end, no. So if you're going to come in new, you're probably going to end up more likely having to you're probably going to take it out on your house, take a second out on your home. Business loans are really hard to get. They're just tough to get. And they're normally going to be for smaller amounts, and then eventually they may convert to being a line of credit type of a debt. So line of credit, sometimes you'll get and use it for the same thing.
Okay. And then there's just one other revenue source, and you can comment where it might fit, but I've been aware and have in the past done NRE, like non-reoccurring engineering work. So it's like you're contracted, but you get to maintain the ownership of what you build. And that's not quite a grant, but it's
So
a way that
you're doing design work for somebody?
you're developing some feature, product, function for, typically I've done it in the past for a government, and then if you work the contract the right way, that department might have a benefit from continuing to use the product.
Yeah, but I don't see it as a startup. To me, that's more like you're running a business where you're working with the government, you're writing proposals, and you're doing work for them. I mean, but it's similar kind of a thing. You've wrote a proposal. It could kind of be a grant-ish type of thing, but it's a contract rather than a grant. Got a question over here. But and so he's doing that. So sometimes check the cities you're in. Some of the cities actually have some money. A lot of times it's more about relocating money. So if you're a manufacturer or something, they may pay you to relocate there. Morgan Hill had $2 million last year for companies to relocate, and they only had one company. They gave them $500,000 just to move to Morgan Hill. Yeah.
Do banks buy future revenue?
Do banks buy future revenue? By default, they're actually just they're saying that you're going to have enough future revenue to pay your loan back. But they don't really buy future revenue. But you can do that through factoring, where you can sell your purchase orders. So if you and that's common in the early stages or in warehousing or where you have to buy some inventory. Factoring will give you X amount of money for 30 days to show you. I've got $200,000 in invoices, and here's your invoices. They give you the $200,000. You buy your inventory. You make the sale. Now you got your money. Now you give them their money back and their interest. So if there's factoring out there, and there's other methods that do those sliding scale factoring kind of things. Yeah, yeah. There's several out there. You got to be really careful of them because a lot of them their rules. If you miss that time frame, which a lot of times is like 30 days, if you miss it by one day, you might as well gotten your money from the mob because they're brutal when they come out of that one day, and all of a sudden you could be 30% interest. Yeah.
So the debt you carry, does that affect the due diligence process when you go out looking for equity?
It can, absolutely. It's like any other financials. All the little pieces of the financials add up to either be favorable, non-favorable. So it definitely can.
So is there a preference on carrying it on the company's name, or should you carry it on as a personal debt?
Well, now you're getting into you're getting the idea. If it's a company debt, then it's a company debt. If you carry it as a personal with a company debt, sometimes they consider that illegal. There's tax reasons for that. So if it's a company debt, it's a company debt. That's back to the CPA. Do not mingle private and business. Have two accounts and all that stuff. So it gets really tricky when you carry. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't be not a business yet and you're just bootstrapping and you're carrying all the debt on your own because you're not really a company yet. But it gets dicey when you start moving the P around a little bit between whose money's whose money's. And
So going back to the quality of their funding, right? So what if some private organization, some company ready to give you money, say in real estate, which normally doesn't deal with the startups.
Mm-hmm.
So, and they say, yeah, we will give you money for like warrant and so on. So what's the best course of action? Should we take it or not?
well, that's case by case. Sure, wherever your money comes in, you're always going to take a, what's the impact to you of doing so. I'm going out with a company right now, where we've got a deal on the table that almost looks too good to be true for some folks that say they can do some stuff. So, you're always trying to decide. That's always a tough one, especially when the check's laying, pen's laying there on top of the checkbook and you can see the check. You got to understand for yourself. We'll get into more detail about that later on in today. Yeah, once we get to some, right now we're just kind of getting through the fundamentals, but we'll get to what makes a good deal, when should you do it or not do it. They're still chasing one more, okay.
Is there a preferred initial equity structuring attractive to investors? Say, we're engineers, we split everything even, and then we have some paying customers, revenue even. Is that okay?
Yes and no. You should really never split them even. Yeah, I mean, it's always, it's really funny how startups work. At the beginning, when everybody's friends, everything's even. And, but it's amazing how those friendships don't last through the ordeals of a business, and suddenly even didn't seem like a good idea anymore. So as the CEO, you should always keep some more. The company should always keep some. You have to have enough out there, because as you go and move around and start doing it, so all you guys will continue to whittle away from your pieces as you bring more partners and more things on board and ventures. And the structure of how that works is that's a case-by-case basis, and it really gets more a matter of what are you willing to work with. Again, it goes back to understanding the model. At the end of the model, if you're going to go to 3 or 4 or 5 years down the road, you're going to get acquired, you're going to move on, you're going to dump everything and just get out, then it doesn't really matter. 10% of $1 billion is worse than 100% of zero. So there's a math piece that kind of moves along with that, and that's understanding this model and how that plays out. You always have to be thinking about that in your equity. If you're asking me from an investor side of the table, what kind of equity structure do we like? We like the one where we have the most. Just for future reference if we're talking. So it's a tricky one. That's all part of the negotiating in the market here. Okay, now we go back to grants, wrap that up real quick. So grants, there's government, there's small business IRs, those tend to be technical there's technical things, there's CRADAs where you team with people. If you're interested in grants or anything from the federal government, go out to FedBizOps or FBO.com. That's where they list everything. Anything you ever want to find about getting proposals and working on stuff is all out there. Now, the last thing I want to talk a little bit about corporate institutions. Corporate institutions do a similar type of funding as well. They all have venture arms, and they all have various ways of which they play in this market space. So a lot of times you can approach the corporates if you have a particular idea that you think fits their bucket real well. They have a variety of different funding methods of which they'll work with us also. And they do grants. Normally when they do grants, they tend to be more non-profit oriented than profit oriented, which non-profit doesn't really excite investors too much. That's that whole non-profit thing. That's not why they do it. Okay, so now let's get back to it. Should you even be looking for it? Okay, you're in a $1 billion market. Everybody says you have to be in a big market. Trust me, everybody in this room has ideas in a $1 billion market. Ink pens are a $1 billion market. We're a global economy now. Nobody sells to across the street, so everything's a $1 billion market. This gets back to your numbers up there. The important is for understanding what market you're in and identifying a reasonable amount of money that's credible for that market space. You can quickly scale. This is the biggest part, the ability to scale quickly. All the startups I work with that have costing models, they're all going to be doing $100 million in sales in 3 years. It's amazing. The people that actually really do that is a really, really small list. But everybody's going to do it. All the startups are going to be making that kind of money. But the point is that's what investors want to see, and it could be feasible. So you've got to be scalable. That's the biggest part of it. And another one is if your goal is to be acquired. So more than 90% of the investments are acquisition strategies. It's to be acquired, not go IPO. But at the end of the day, it doesn't necessarily matter, but acquisitions tend to be a little more controllable. You don't have to wait for market conditions. So for example, yesterday would probably not have been a good day to go IPO. So there's a lot of conditions that go along with that. So in general, oh yeah, it's 1 o'clock. Okay. So if you answer yes to those, then yes, private funding is probably for you. You fit the model, you fit the market, you probably have the kind of idea that would go down there. Now, if you're looking for a smaller scale business, how many people in here would be comfortable with a $30 million a year business? Okay. That's probably going to give you a nice lifestyle. You'll drive the car you want, live in the house you want, but you're not fundable. You're not big enough for what they're looking for. They want bigger numbers than that. Back to that thing, if control is important to you, if you want to be the boss and you want to stay in charge and you want to do that, if you just want to be self-employed, then private investment is probably not a model for you. It's not going to work for you. And so a lot of companies I see out there, a lot of entrepreneurs spend a lot of time trying to chase down money when the business they're in just isn't an investor style of a business. Doesn't mean it can't generate a nice income and a nice return on investment. We just have to come up with a different strategy for you than going out and convincing an investor to give you money. Yes?
So is there sort of a, is there a sort of, can everyone hear me with or without?
I think it's for
Okay. Okay, sorry. Okay. So we're trying to make an early decision, it seems, to say, should I go for VC funding or not? But there might be a period where your business, may actually be a larger scale business, but everyone starts small if you want to succeed. And then, so initially or smaller scale. So isn't there a timing in terms of like, try and do it on your own as much as you can and then kind of look for the VC funding?
Sure. Absolutely. Absolutely. So on a positive note, everybody gets to start small. So we all get to start with the same fundamental structure. Now, the question is, when you start looking at it, are you looking to go big? See, an entrepreneurial mindset is all about optimism and going big. That's what entrepreneurs do. They're looking to build the next big thing. So it's a different mindset than I just would like to be self-employed, I'd like to run a business and work it. Now, you may start that you're going to go small scale and suddenly decide that, wow, there's a bigger part of this, and you may change your mind. But at the beginning, when you're doing your strategies and laying out your plan, you need to decide early on, are you going the entrepreneur model? Are you going to run 100 miles an hour and do the 2-minute drill? Or are you going to just build a nice business and be comfortable lifestyle? So you do need to understand early. Again, in business, there's nothing that says you can't change. So when I talk about planning, there's 3 steps to planning, and that's why you should do it. Plan, execute, and adjust. As they say in the art of war, no plan survives first contact. Or as John Lennon said more famously, life happens while you're planning. But you have to have a plan, and you have to be constantly shifting that plan to go along with what you're doing, and so you know what you're doing. So yeah, I would say you need to know that at the beginning. Yeah.
Questions regarding, founders. Founders who start, and like the first model, the big model. The founders and original CEOs can be removed and changed and replaced, right?
Absolutely.
What's their they sit across from the investors. What's their protection? What is their keep once they are booted out? What is their keep, right?
Well, their keep is whatever they have. So when they go, they still have what they had. So as your agreements are in place and you have what you have, if they ask you to leave, they buy you out. Now, they may ask you to just step into a different role, and you may carry what you have and then go into a different role. But rarely do they boot you out and take everything away from you.
Right. They don't look to dilute you completely and wipe you out, right? That's
No, but if they just want you out of there because you're not the right person, and if you want to play fair and move around, that's fine. If you don't, then they'll buy you out. Rarely are they going to yank you out unless there's problems in your agreement. And the attorney will probably talk about that today. How many startups get started with handshakes? Again, at the beginning, everybody's friends, and it all works well until it's not. And then suddenly that handshake, they remember completely different than you remembered it. So all these things in writing, I'm sure the attorney that comes in is going to talk about how important it is to have these agreements more firm than, just a simple thing. So here's a big common problem that happens early on with shares. So you come on board, you and your partners, you decide, okay, we're going to put 10% to the company, I'm going to take 50 and you get 30. And everybody agrees, that's great. So now 3 years down the road, you're all real, you've got funding, and now you're actually going to start giving out some of the stock certifications. You're going to start giving the stock to them. It's no longer just a line on an agreement that says, I have this. So they say, okay, here's your 30% of the stock option plan. They're going, well, hold on, I thought I had 30% of the company. No, it's 30% of the stock option plan. Well, that's not what I remember. And that's a very common argument that happens there when all of a sudden that 30% became part of the 30% of the stock option plan, which is actually 20% of the company. So now your 30% of the company became 30% of a stock option plan. That's a whole different animal. And that happens all the time. The CEOs always remember it coming out of the stock option plan. The person who had the money always remembers it coming out as the company. But anyway, so there's that kind of, yeah.
Hi, so if you are the second kind of company where you think that, control is important and you want to be self-employed, does that mean that you shouldn't try to raise angel funding round either? Or
I wouldn't say it means no, but your odds of getting angel funding. Now, that's different than having friends and family and asking somebody to be an angel who you know that's within your, that you know. But if you're going to go out to the hill and try to go to Carol Sands and say, I've got a great $20 million company, I'm looking for $500,000 in funding, she's going to go, thank you very much. Here's a cup of coffee on your way out. That's not what they're looking for. It's a different model. And we're going to cover a lot of this stuff later on as we get going. It's still morning-ish. It's not morning now, it's 1 o'clock. But
Is it better to give even the co-founder stock options rather than co-founder shares?
At the end of the day, they're kind of the same. A stock option is just a different terminology. It's an option to get the stock done. But in shares, at the beginning, the founders are always going to have some shares. That's just, they would expect that. I'm not sure why a founder would come in and not ask for shares. So it's normally not part of the stock option. So distinctly, they leave the stock options are normally later down the road. But at the end of the day, you may always get stock options. You always have the right to exercise the shares because you don't own them yet, probably. They're probably just in a piece of paper somewhere. It says they're there, and at some point they're going to give them to you, and you can choose to option it, exercise them and say, these aren't going anywhere. I'm not going to waste my time with them, or whatever. What you don't want to be is the third guy from Apple that sold his for $800. Okay. Now let's look at the types of funding. We've got to wrap just to get things here so we can get down to some of the meat here. So the types of equity. Okay, everybody's heard of angel funding. So angel funding is private funding. So my group, South Valley Angels, we're angels. We're all individual investors. And when an angel writes you a check, that check comes out of his bank account. That's his check. He feels that directly. Angels invest $5,000, $25,000, up to $1 million. Golden Seeds will go $1 million plus. Band of Angels have $1 million fund in their sidecar. Most angels aren't going to go that high, but there's a few of them. Most angels are going to probably be in the 100K to 500K range. And an angel by default is an individual, and that individual probably is going to do anywhere from 5 to 50K more than likely on average, most individual angels. So my group, if you come in and pitch and 5 people like what you did, then you'll probably get 5 checks from each one of them, ranging anywhere. I've had angels write as much as $300,000 checks, or as little as, I think the smallest check we've ever written is 10K, I think. But anyway, so the money comes from them. It's out of their pocket. It's their money. It's near and dear to them. Then you have venture capitals, VCs. They tend to go more in the larger rounds, and traditionally they're in the 5 million and up range, but there's more VCs that are starting to call themselves early seed round VCs, and they're going down as far as 500K. That's still kind of a new area for them. It's not quite what they're doing. Now, when a venture capitalist writes you a check, that's not his check. He's writing a check out of a fund, from his company. So worst case for him, if he makes a couple bad investment decisions, he just loses his 7-figure job. And then he goes across the street and gets one of the competitor and probably does it again. So it's not their money. So most of VC money comes out of pension funds is really what happens. Most of the pensions feed those funds. That's where you hear these $300, $400 million, $2 billion funds and things like that. So they're writing an institutional check that isn't even theirs. It belongs to the company that's doing it. We have this thing called super angels. They kind of pop up a little bit. Super angels would be probably people like Elon Musk, these guys that could instantly just go out and write you $1 million check just because they can and they thought it was a great idea. I don't know any groups that refer to themselves as super angels, but there's individuals out there that have the ability to write large checks. Corporate venture. We touched base a little bit about it, but corporate venture is a big deal. Intel was the granddaddy that did corporate venture. Now virtually every Fortune 1000 company has a venture arm. They're all giving money out to startups to develop things that are in their sweet spot that they want to see developed. Those can be nice deals. A lot of times what happens is they pay you to develop your product like you're talking about. You get it there, you get it done, and then they just buy you. All sort of one-stop shop. So that's another one. Then we're going to get down here to the crowdfunding. Everybody's familiar with the various crowdfundings out there. So you got the Kickstarters out there, which is a non-equity. To be successful on a Kickstarter, you probably should be something in the hardware realm, and you should probably be consumer-facing. Those tend to be popular. And trust me, everybody that gets on Kickstarter doesn't get $1 million. You hear about those all the time where people get on these money. It's amazing. The average funding for a company in Kickstarter, I just saw it the other day, it's like $1,000. Most of it's pretty small, but you always hear about the big folks, the Pebble Watch that got their 10 million when they only wanted a little bit. Okay, so now you got the Kickstarters, Indiegogo, Tilt, all these kind of folks that do those kind of things. And then you got the side now that are coming up that actually have equity in them with investors, the Equity Next, Angel List, Angel Pool. They're popping up, they're springing up all over the place now. These are because of the new jobs bill. Now, let me give a little word of caution on those kind. So if you go into these angel pools, you could easily get people that just want to invest give you $1,000. And you may get 100 people that want to give you $1,000. Okay, that's your $100,000. You got what you wanted. You're fine. You're happy with that. It doesn't matter. It's simply just click, 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 and get your money. Now you decide you want to go to another round and you want to get $5 million from a VC. You're probably dead in the water because they're going to look at your cap table with all those 100 investors that just gave you $1,000, and they're going to go, man, there are too many people involved. I'm not interested. Because now those people kind of have voting rights and all these things that go along with owning share in your company. It becomes too complicated. So if you go into the equity, you're probably going to have to stay in there. Now a VC may come back and just have you buy those people out that came on board, potentially, who knows. But normally you're going to probably lose it after that because there's just going to be too many people involved and they're not going to want to, it's just too much work. And then I put incubators and accelerators in there because generally you have a bunch of people in one building that are being run by a bunch of investors, and they're kind of just watching you to see who they like, and a bunch of those investors will invest in you eventually down the road if you're the right person. But they kind of do the same thing. Incubators were really started as an investor play. As an investor, it's hard for me to go and have deals coming through my door one at a time, so why don't I just open up a building and put 300 entrepreneurs in there and pick the 3 I like, and then let everybody else die on the vine. Incubators are not created equal. Some do a very good job of helping everybody out. A lot of them don't. They kind of find out who are the real good companies in there. They find those, and those guys always get to the top of the list of all the things that are happening. But I put incubators in there, and some are good, and some aren't as good. Okay, I'm not going to go over this chart, but this is a really good chart that was done by funders and founders that I've always kind of liked, and I'll include it when we send it to you. But it talks about how you as a founder here start out with your $100,000, I mean your 100% of your company, and how when you get down here you actually have 17.6% of your company now. But they do a really good job of understanding the idea stage, co-founders. Now you're splitting it 50-50 here. Oh, now some's going into the option pool, 20%. Your uncle got 5%, friends and family. And so they did a good job. So I'll let you guys take a look at this. It kind of wraps the idea of dilution up, understanding kind of how things work a little bit. It's a good little chart. I've always kind of liked it. It's a little hard to read from back there, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. Okay, so now picking the right investor. So now you've decided to go out and do this, and now you're looking to pick the right investor. What makes the right investor? I know, the one that's willing to write the check, right? Isn't that the right investor? Okay, so the right investor is going to understand what you're doing. They probably understand your space. So when you're going out looking for money, it's as critical for you to look at the investor websites and understand who they are. Why are you calling Greylock Ventures? Why are you calling Carol Sands at Angels Forum? Why are you calling me at South Valley Angels? Just like looking for a job, you need to understand why you're calling those people. Have they invested in that space before? Do they invest in that space? Are they involved in that space? So it's reason to understand that. So you want investors who understand what you're doing. So when you go in and tell them that you've got a neat thing, they get it. They can look at it and say, oh, I understand that. And so it's important. They don't have to be experts in it, but they need to understand what you're doing so they can see the value. Or you're good enough in the way that you do your pitch that you can bring them to understand the value. Most of the time what happens is that there's not a fit in the market space, and that's what investors get most nervous about, is the market space. They may think you're doing a really good job, they think you got a good team, you got a neat product, but they just don't know this space well enough to know, are there like 20 of you coming out tomorrow? I just don't know. And so that's usually what trips them up, and they'll eventually back out because they don't know the space. Now if they know the space well enough, then they'll know how you fit. If you've done your homework, you'll have picked them and you're talking to them because they understand what you're doing. Yeah.
I have a question. If I find the right investor in the space what I'm working in my case, sharing economy,
okay.
There's a big chance they're already investing in a similar company, and I hear from them, sorry, we don't want to compete with one of our investors or one of our companies already. Right.
And there is some of that. You'll see some of that they don't want to compete, particularly if you're exactly one for one and they're absolutely an investor. Sometimes that will be the case. And so, that's not always the case, but a lot of times you're not necessarily going to look for them because you're a one-on-one investor. They just understand what sandbox you're in. But you're right. If they have just recently invested in somebody exactly like you, then yeah, they're probably not going to do it again real quick. Okay, so they understand your business. The other thing you're looking for is high caliber investors will bring high value contacts. So as much as anything, you've all heard you want smart money. And this is really where the smart money comes in. There's a few opportunities where you need your investor to help you. So if you're going with an angel investor, one of the most important things the angel investor can do is hand carry you to the VC when it becomes time to go to that next round. If the VC can't do that for you, then the burden's back on you. And I hope you had a lot of fun finding your angel investor, because you're going to do the same thing now with a VC. So you really want your angel investors to be able to hand carry you to the next round if that's the case. You want them to potentially be able to fill gaps in your team. Do they know some folks? Do they have strategic partners within their reach that could help you do it? So when you find this investor, you really want 1 + 1 = 3. You want them to bring more to the table than just, hey, I like your idea, here's a check. And most investors aren't going to invest that way anyway, because all that sort of does is say that you probably I've given you my money, so now you can go broke on my money. So most investors that do invest will probably see a 1 + 1 = 3 relationship, how there's more to the table than just me writing a check and me relying on your team to go out and be successful. Okay, so great. So now you've decided you've gone out and you searched the web and you found the 25 investors you're going to start contacting. So how do you get in? How do you go talk to an investor? You'd be surprised how it seems strange. Just go knock on their door. It sounds strange, like why would I do that? Keep in mind, investors are in business to make investments. They're always looking for deal flow. So everybody always asks me, so what kind of deal flow do you guys look for? And I like to say, we look for good deal flow. Bad deal flow is just too much work, and I'm getting lazy in my old age. So the reality is, if you've got a good idea, be confident about your idea, and just go knock on their door. Now, with that said, you could do the same thing. You're looking for a job. You could just go to Google and knock on the front door and say, hey, I'm looking for a job. And hey, get in line. So networking. Coming to things like Rob's events. So here's where a lot of people err. So here's a simple one. How many people have gone into Rob's events where you've got the investors are sitting on a panel, and they're either doing 2-minute doing 2-minute drills, or they're doing 6-minute pitches, or they're just being questioned and stuff, and you've got investors sitting at a panel. Have you guys been to those? Okay. Frequently I'm on those panels. Now, go to a lot of those. Go to every one of those that you see. If you see that there's an investor panel, go. All you got to do is go there, say hi, and take their card. Just go and get their cards. Go collect their cards. Then when you're ready to go talk to them, you can go back now and write a nice little email to them directly to their email. You have their cell phone number. You can go in and contact them. But it's amazing how many times I sit on these panels and we get done and I look at certain people out there and they come and they go and they never ask for a card. You're there with investors on a panel. If you don't know any investors, get their cards. And that's what they'll give them to you. That's why I guarantee you they'll all give you their cards. So go to a lot of those events. That's how you come across investors. Then you'll come across like, God, Gary, you're on another one of these? Yeah.
Everywhere, on Quora and everywhere, even when I Google, it says that most of the investors prefer that they get introduced.
Well, absolutely. So there's preferred, and then there's heal. So you're right. We would prefer a vetted deal coming from a respected source who we've worked with before. That's the perfect world, absolutely. If you're not that person and you still need to go somebody, you can't rely on that. So you still have to go out and make the contacts. You have to take charge and do that. But absolutely, vetted deals from a preferred source, absolutely the best way to go for us. Lower risk, it's probably starting with a good company. But with that said, you still have to go out and do what you're going to do. So go get their card, build a relationship for them, and there's ways you can go about talking to them in the networking. Don't always be looking for money. Sometimes just go and contact them and say, hey, I'm looking for some ideas. I got a question. Where do you see this space? Most VCs are willing to help you out. People are normally good at heart. They'll answer a quick question. They're not going to take a 1-hour talk with you and answer all your questions, but they'll do that. So a lot of times it's a matter of building the relationships with them. Hey, I saw you at the panel. Thought you had some great answers. I really what you're doing. I've got a startup in your space. When I'm ready, do you mind if I give you a call? And they'll send back. 9 out of 10 times they'll go, oh, absolutely, sure. When you're ready, give me a call. By the way, what are you doing? Anyway, so networking. Use Rob's events. They're a great way to do it. Look for places that have panels. Don't go to Rob's events that have people that are just networking, because you're probably not going to find any investors. If you do, they're not going to tell you. Because the last thing I want to do is tell everybody in a room of 500 people of entrepreneurs who are all looking for funding, hey, I'm an investor. I'm never getting out of that room. But anyway, so go to the ones that have investors on the panel and you know they're going to be there. Okay, again, research the ones that fit your profile. So as you go through these, take these business cards, then go out and look at that firm, see who they do, how they work, boom, boom, who fits your profile. Again, looking at investors who invested in space and so forth, or in spaces, or did their people come out of those spaces and those kind of things. Understanding where that's at, because they'll understand what you're doing. Another thing that people do, go and look at these companies they've invested in or been around and go directly to that company and ask that company, hey, how's it like working with these guys, or whatever the case may be. So there's a variety of different ways to go get it. And a lot of times that company may have some other investors that they talk to that know are interested in a space because they talk to them and so forth. And they might be able to make that introduction for you and get you in. Who knows? Again, we talk about that. Ask for guidance rather than funding. Look to learn, get involved. The idea is just to build relationships with them. And then, obviously, persistence. So the world has changed a little bit, but not as much as we would like it to. So in the early days, back when in '99, there was only a handful of places to get money. And they absolutely sat down there on Page Mill Road and Sand Hill Road in their ivory towers and made you feel that you were just so honored to be allowed in their lobby. And you better be bringing something earth-shattering and not wasting their time. Now, many of them are still kind of think that way. But the reality is there's so many different places to get money. They're not as much in control as they used to be. They're still in denial a little bit. But there's a lot of places to go out and get money now. It's not critical that you have to walk up and down Sand Hill Road. But that used to be it. So persistence. Just keep up going. It's hard. It's like looking for a job. There's a lot of work involved. Okay, now let's talk about the little folks a little bit. We talked about private investors, angels. This we were talking about. Normally, these kind of folks you're going to get through referrals, friends, business associates. They tend to be one-on-one individuals that you just know, oh, I know somebody that's got some money. And in this valley, there's a lot of individuals with money that can write nice checks. Then you get angel investment firms, Band of Angel, Angels Forum, Sand Hill Angels, South Valley Angels. You got all these different angel groups out there. They normally tend to meet once a month or every other month. So you have to get through this process. We'll talk a little bit about that. How many female businesses are female owned or operated or controlled businesses in here? Okay, so you all want to know Golden Seeds. They only invest in women-controlled businesses. That's all they invest in. They're East Coast, West Coast. They're huge. They write good checks. They're really easy to work with. So if a female in your organization has 10% ownership or more, they'll invest in you. Golden Seeds. 10% or more, yeah. That's an interesting question. That actually comes up quite a bit. So there's a couple things so I've worked with companies that do that. So one of the things there's a couple things that are difficult in getting invested. One being an army of one. Investors don't invest in a team of one. There's just too much risk. The other thing that gets tricky is husband and wife teams. So if you're a husband and wife team, don't put both of you on the slide deck as founder and co-founder. If you're married, you're a co-founder by default. Trust us. Whichever one's on the chart, whichever one's not on the chart, they're a co-founder. We understand how that works. But when they see founder, co-founder, that actually has a significant meaning. That means you both have voting rights in the company, even though you probably still have voting rights in the company at home at dinner. But the point being is it crosses over a boundary, and nothing kills a startup faster than a divorce. Now, we recognize that, you want it. So this company I worked with refused today. They still refuse to take her off the chart. And a lot of companies say, oh, co-founder, founder, we don't invest in husband-wife teams, period, done. Conversation over. Now, they like husband-wife teams working together because a lot of those actually tend to do well because you're both committed going along. Again, just don't list yourself as founder, co-founder, and you each have this X amount shares of stock. It's California, you probably have a 50-50 percent share, no matter how that works out at the end. But that's the thing on husband-wife teams there. Okay, now back to the crowdfunding and lists. These groups can actually be really slow ways to go. Band of Angels, I know a lot of them. Great guys. They can kick the tires on a startup longer than any organization I've ever seen in my life. They can spend 6 months running you through the ringers to come back and say, yeah, we're going to pass. You go, wow, really? For 6 months you've been dragging us along for that. So anyway, just those groups can be a little harder to work with. Sand Hill Angels, they tend to invest a little bit more. Carol Sands is really good. She's pretty quick. She'll tell you right up front. Sometimes brutally honest, but yeah.
You said investors invest in co-founders. When you say co-founders, are you talking about like, is it okay to have a team rather than co-founders? Because like, let's say like in this scenario, like I've come from India, okay? So like over there, you don't have co-founders. You've got your big team and you build something, and then you come over here and everybody says, okay, you got to have co-founders. Now, are you guys really looking for co-founders or you're looking for a team?
Well, that's a good question. That's a good question. Fundamentally, we're looking for a team. We're looking for a team. If you got one co-founder in the team, that's fine. That just spreads this, less stock left over.
You're not going to take any marks out?
No, but you're also playing a little bit with just word semantics. In the early stages, anybody that probably came with you early on is more likely going to be a co-founder. They've got some more ownership than just 2 or 3 shares.
No, we're talking about foreign.
Well, okay, so 90% of the Indian companies I work with in here that are writing startup, I can guarantee that their cousin's team in India is doing the programming. I mean, that's extremely common. So off-site teams is not uncommon. It's much more common now, particularly in that scenario where there's a lot of programmers and a lot of coders in India and they're doing the work. What they want to see is that there's enough team here that they can hang their hat on that team. So you probably, your headquarters should be here, your business team should be here, your operations team should be here, and you've got an off-site coding team, not a problem. But team and founders is sort of a play on words.
The IP should be here or there?
The IP needs to belong to the company. If the IPO is over there, then you're probably not a U.S. company with any value to what you're bringing to the table. So the IP always stays with the company, not the people. Yeah.
So I had a quick question follow-up. So I'm a sole founder right now.
Okay.
And I realize that I need a co-founder, but I think the reasons why I need a co-founder, it's a hardware company, so no cousins in India or whatever.
Okay.
But I think the reason I need a co-founder for investors to believe in me is because they want to see someone who's been there, done that successfully, and it's from a control standpoint as well. Not just you obviously need the team that can execute, but if you have a bad founder on top, then the investors are leery, and they just don't know you from Adam, so they're just gonna have to see.
Yeah, I wouldn't get too wrapped up around the words of founder and team. The only difference between that is one of them has more shares than another. Everybody on your team may have shares. You may be the only one that owns shares, and you're paying the rest of the team through salaries. There's a lot of ways that team could exist. But in 99% of the cases, your team consists of folks of which of that team, maybe 3 or 4, like your C-levels, a CTO, CFO, your CEO, your COO, those may all be considered founders. Somebody that came in and gave you some money as a friends and family would become a founder. And at the end of the day, they're all part of the team that makes the team successful to get out the door.
That's where the earlier question came, because that's the stock option and the co-founder shares. Because like tomorrow, one of them can go and trade along.
Absolutely. There's without a doubt that can always happen. And so it's when you're giving out your shares, it's always important how you do that. Do you do them over time? How do you protect? That's back to that protection strategy. How do you handle the way you do that?
I had a quick question.
Yeah.
How do you protect your idea before talking to an investor?
How do you protect your idea? Well, let's start it this way. No investor is going to take your idea. For one, they're not in the idea business. They're in the money business. If they want to be in the idea business, they go back to becoming entrepreneurs again. I get this question a lot more from folks coming over from the foreign countries. It is a lot of work. It is a lot of work to steal an idea. Investors don't do that. Investors don't sign NDAs either, but they're not going to steal your idea. They're not going to go out, it's just too much work. Besides, if your idea can be stolen that easy, then you're back to what's defensible here again. Yeah.
So you mentioned that it's kind of depends how easy it works with different group of like angels, right? Some would take a very long time before you understand what feedback there is. Some takes fast. How to recognize these signs? Like you mentioned, band of angels can you get you back and forth for 6 months, and there is no outcome.
Yeah, it's tough. It's tough. It's sort of like dating. How do you realize this is the right one? You go to a couple dates and then 3 or 4 dates and you're going, oh, I wasted all my time. This isn't ever going to go anywhere. Anyway, so it's hard to do. It's really difficult. There's no science. It's an art. Most of the groups in here are pretty good, but some of them just take a long time, particularly the monthly groups. Because at minimum, you got to wait a month to get on the meeting, and then after that they're going to do stuff. So there's just time that goes by. There's various things that cause it. That just calendar goes by. Okay, the last thing, one of the things we're talking about now, we got to have the VC firms like Sequoia, Accel, Greylock Partners. And then we have the type of firms that I call cost, the cost or the pay-to-play groups, and that's like Keiretsu Forum. Keiretsu Forum is probably the largest group. They're in 8 countries. They're everywhere. But they charge $6,000 to pitch to them. Wow. Everything they do costs. But they're a for-profit organization. They're an organization, they pitch an X number of companies every quarter because that's their quotas. They do that. They do their thing. They probably invest in close to 50% of the companies that pitch. But if you're the 50% that doesn't, that's $6,000 you just put out the door and got nothing but a thank you and a coffee. Anyway, I'm not a fan of the pay-to-play. That's just me. All right. What do you need? Now we're going to talk about team a little bit. You need the right team. You got to have the technical person that understands what you're doing. You have to have the business people that understand it. So the key things that can help you get successful on when a team is having somebody that's been there and done it before. One of the questions we always ask, has anybody on your team ever brought anything to market before? And if the answer is yes, great. Then we might talk a little bit about that. Because if you've done it before, you can probably do it again. If nobody in your team's ever done that, then how do we get over that hurdle? We also want to talk about having experience in a startup or small business. If everybody on your team came out of corporate America, wow, almost guaranteed to fail. They do not understand the concept of a small business. They're going to get in a meeting and they're going to sit there and say, okay, so that's a great idea. Let's get the marketing team fired up. Who's the marketing team? That's you today, Bob. And if they came out of corporate world, they don't know how to work in that environment. They're used to having access. So make sure that some people understand how to work in a small environment. And then specialty people might be people that understand some real strict verticals of what you're in. You may be in a highly regulated environment or market, and so you might have advisors that understand the regulatory aspects of it, or legal advisors, or advisors that bring subject matter experts to the table. Obviously, you got to have your CEOs, CFOs, your C-level teams. And once you got your team in place, then you can't do anything without the right documents. Everything requires paperwork. To go out and look for funding, you have to have an executive summary. Think about that as being your company resume. That's the one thing you hand to everybody to get you in the door. Then you got to have your classic 10-page presentation so you can do in your pitch. Think of that as your first interview. Then you want to get to the second interview, or what they call a deep dive. We'll talk about that. And then they may want to look at your business plan and actually go through the details of what's going on there in that perspective. And of course, you've got to have your passion. It's really important to understand that nobody's going to feel like this the way you do. So it's important to bring that, that up tempo to the game. So this is the process now of going through this. So you're going to come in to me, hey Gary, I understand you're an angel investor. Do you mind if I come pitch to you? And I go, well, I'll tell you what. Why don't you just send me an executive summary? So email me your executive summary. I'm going to take a look at that executive summary. And in my particular case, from our group, we're going to look at it. If we like it, we'll invite you back to pitch. What's going to happen, though, is really what that does, and that now puts you in the screening process. And the screening process can come in 2 different flavors. Ours, we screen the executive summary, then we just have you come in and pitch to the group. We're a small group. You go to some of the bigger groups, and you may come in and do a pre-pitch to a screening committee. So you're going to do your pitch to the screening committee. And then the screening committee is going to say, oh, we like what you're doing. Then they say, can you come back and pitch at our monthly meeting? So then you'll come back and pitch again, and they'll probably coach you a little bit there on how to do it exactly the way they like it for their particular pitch meetings. So that pitch meeting now is when you're in front of the real group. So a lot of times, Carol Sands, Band of Angels, they all go through a screening process where you'll come in and pitch to a smaller group, and then they'll screen you in or out after that. So you make it through the pitch, then they're going to ask you to come back. And now we're going to go to what's commonly referred to the deep dive. And that can take anywhere from hours to days to weeks to months, depending who's doing it. And this is really where they do the due diligence and decide if they're going to invest in you. Because now they're going to sit down, they're going to meet you. If you got a killer algorithm, they may have their technical person come on board and take a look at it and find out if you truly do have a killer algorithm. They may have an accountant come on board and look at all your financials in detail. They may sit down and interview each one of your team members. They may talk to folks that are using it. They may go through all this process. When they're done with this, they know if they're going to invest in you. Then they get to what's commonly called the due diligence. I keep both these green because they're really the same. Once they're done with this, you're going to go to due diligence, and really all they do in that phase is the term sheet negotiation. So you're going to show up with your term sheet of what you think it is, and the investor is going to give you what they're willing to do. And then it becomes a negotiation from that. So now you go into the negotiation of the term sheet. And that can be fairly lengthy, and that's when all the money starts too, because now you've got lawyers on board. So the investors are firing up their lawyers to write the term sheets. You're firing up your lawyers to review the term sheets. Everybody's giving lawyers all sorts of money to decide whether anybody's going to get any money. Now, when you get to these, I'm not going to go in deal because I'm not a lawyer, so I'll leave the legal guys up to this, but there's some common terms you should note. You know, common stock, preferred stock. Common stock means you can vote. Preferred stock means you get some dividends probably, and you get paid off first if things go upside down or if things start to happen. So you want to understand the idea between common and preferred. There's convertible notes and warrants. It used to be on the West Coast, we all did convertible notes, and on the East Coast, they all did warrants. Well, now everybody does warrants and convertible notes. They mix them all together. Convertible note means it converts to something later. It's a debt product, so if that convertible note doesn't convert, at the end of the day, you CEO owe that money back to the investors with the interest you promised. So it's probably going to convert to something. Warrants are just sweeteners that you can add to the pie a little bit to the convertible notes or however. I'm going to send you, when you send me the information, I'll send you a term sheet checklist with just a bunch of terms. What I recommend on that checklist is go down and just familiarize yourself. It's about a page and a half of stuff. Familiarize yourself just what's on it and be aware of those terms and those words so that when somebody throws one out at you, you're not deer in the headlights going, I heard about that. Don't know what it means, but I've heard that, so it's a real word. All right. When you took a valuation, so valuation's a tricky thing. If you've got a business and it's existing and there's a lot of valuation methods, the IRS has a very specific formula how to define valuation. The problem is when you get to a startup environment, this is kind of the model for doing startup valuation. There is no real model, so you sort of sit down and look at comparables. How big is the space you're in? There's a variety of variables that everybody sort of takes a look at, and you come up with your valuation. So you've got fair markets and so forth. So a lot of folks will do that. So Jeff is one of the guys. Jeff Faust does the evaluation for Abbott, String & Millennium, which is one of our partners and one of the IPOs. If you're going to go and give out stock, you have to have a 409A evaluation. That's mandatory, so that you do have to do, and you normally have to pay to get that done. Or in the early phases, if an angel comes up or if an investor asks you what your valuation is, my answer to them would be, I'd love to come back and sit down and talk with you about that. Because I guarantee whatever number you rattle out, you're wrong. It's the wrong number. It just is. The nature of it is the beast. You're going to want it to be more. They're going to want it to be less. So it's a good time to sit down. I'd say I'd love to sit down and talk to you about it. If they pressure you, then you can give them something if you know what you think it is. Here's some areas and some tools for valuations you can go out to if you're curious. They talk about how to get your company valued. Again, at the end of the day, your valuation is really what you all around the table decide it is and agree upon it. There's nothing that says it is or isn't. So once everybody agrees in it, then that's what it is. Okay, that brings us to an end for this first part here. When we come back, when I come back after the attorneys talking, we're going to go into detail on how to build your pitch deck, how to talk like a CEO, and how to make sure you've got the right message going out and the right value propositions. And that's what we'll do next. We're going to go line by line, bullet by bullet on exactly what an investor wants to see and how to go about doing that to make sure you do that.